For the business community and for others in Chicago to focus on these pivotal questions that will determine the context of the global economy over the next 5 years. So throughout the fall, we'll be hearing perspectives from macroeconomists, from business executives, recognized thought leaders in these 4 programs. So in addition to the program tonight, we have a session planned next month that will explore the path to market leadership and innovation and technology. In November, we'll look at how companies can navigate the new business environment. And the new business environment is one in which we have an expanded government presence. And the series then will wrap up in December when we discuss to what extent global imbalances can be addressed to reduce instability in the global economy. So at your places tonight, you'll find more information on these upcoming programs, and I hope that you'll be able to join us for each of them. I also want to thank Monitor Group for their support of this series. So tonight, we're very happy to have Jim and Phil with us to kick off this important series and take a close look at global consumer demand. So let me take a moment to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is Jim Skinner, Vice Chairman and CEO of McDonald's. And Jim leads the world's largest food service company with 32,000 restaurants in 117 countries. McDonald's serves 60 million customers each day, employs 1.7 million people around the world. And Jim's first job at McDonald's was working at a McDonald's in Davenport, Iowa, where he grew up. He then had a stint in the Navy and then joined McDonald's in 1971 and has held numerous leadership positions throughout his tenure, including President and Chief Operating Officer. He's had extensive international experience. He ran the European operations, and he had responsibility for Asia Pacific, Middle East, and of course now has responsibility for the entire operation. He was named in 2009 the CEO of the Year, and was recently named one of Barron's 30 most respected CEOs. I'm not sure if Barron's has a list of 30 least respected CEOs, but he's definitely not on that list. Now, our next speaker is Phil Kotler. Phil is the S.C. Johnson & Sons Professor of International Marketing at the Kellogg School at Northwestern University. And Phil's the author of numerous books. I couldn't possibly give you all the titles. His probably most well-known book is Marketing Management, Analysis, Planning, Implementation, and Control. This is the most widely used marketing book in graduate business schools around the world. He's published over 100 articles in leading journals, several which have received Best Article awards. He has 11 honorary degrees, universities all over the world, in Europe, Latin America, Eastern Europe. I was wondering if he has a wall large enough to put all these certificates on the wall or not, but he's clearly been recognized on a worldwide basis. He's traveled extensively, advising many countries on how to apply sound economic and marketing principles to increase their competitiveness. So we have 2 excellent speakers. Our format tonight will have each speaker start off with some prepared remarks, and then followed by a discussion, and the 3 of us will come up here, sit in these very comfortable chairs. I'll moderate a discussion among the 3 of us, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So Jim and Phil, thank you for taking time to be with us here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Well, thank you, Michael, and good evening, everyone. It's a tremendous honor to be here and be part of this highly distinguished group. I'm already very nervous because Philip is speaking also, but I noticed he has no notes. Now, I don't know whether he has them in his pocket or whether he's doing this off the cuff, but it's a real pleasure to be here with you, Philip, and your reputation precedes you, and it's a pleasure for me to participate. The Chicago Council on Global Affairs has always been an important home to leadership, thought, and discussion about the world around us. It's a true asset to our great city. And Chicago should always be in the mix of both embracing and influencing the ideas that shape our world. So I'm delighted to be with you and hopefully adding to the kind of stimulating dialogue that takes place here on a regular basis. Now, the discussion we're having this evening is about the consumer, what they're doing, what they're thinking, and what they're looking for these days around the globe, and what that means for businesses and economies moving forward. Now, the first thing I should say is that if I had all the answers to those questions, I could simply phone my scores in. But this business of consumer insights and understanding the consumer is more an art than it is a science. It's an area where you're always learning and understanding. It's an area that we pay a lot of attention to at McDonald's, as you would imagine. Around the world, we operate 32,000 restaurants in 117 countries, and as Michael said, every day, 60 million people pass through our doors and our drive-thrus. Now, that's a lot of consumers. And so we focus a great deal on knowing as much as we can about those 60 million people and what's motivating them and what their needs are and how McDonald's can fill those needs. And these days, we're doing a pretty good job. The past quarter marked our 29th consecutive quarter of global comparable sales increases, and we've continued to grow through July, August, and now into September. And we're certainly anxious, like all of you, for the economy to fully recover, because we do better when times are good and consumers are confident. There are people who believe that the economy is good for McDonald's because we offer everyday affordability. That's true. But we do better in robust times like everyone else. And we offer our customers today what they're looking for more than ever. Things like great value, quality, outstanding convenience, and relevant menu offerings. And I should stress that truly listening to the consumer was something that we had to work at. In the old days, we followed a simple but successful formula: offer quality, consistent food, run great restaurants, and expand around the world. For us, it was build it and they will come. After a while, this kind of confidence got us into trouble. It led to an innovation process that could be best described as ready, fire, aim. We weren't connecting with what our customers wanted or meeting their changing needs, and so our brand suffered around the turn of the century. It's always weird to say that, but it was 10 years ago, 2000. But we got back on track in no small part by creating a more robust consumer insights process and focusing smartly on what were the right things to deliver for our guests. It's one of the things that I feel good about during my regime is that wanting to know more about the consumers and listening more about what it is they wanted, and then more importantly, doing something about what you know. And it's resulted in the kind of menu successes we've had lately, especially with our line of snack wraps and McCafe coffees, beverages here in the United States, for example. And it's led us to diversify our menus around the world and to become a more locally relevant brand. Now, to be sure, and you all know this, we serve our Big Macs, fries, and McNuggets across the globe. And they are our core products, and they're popular in a lot of places. But we're also more focused on offering local products that our customers tell us they want, like shrimp in Japan, beer in Germany, and Spam in Hawaii. Now, in case you didn't know this, Hawaii has the highest Spam consumption per capita of any state. And I would suggest any country. They love it, and we serve it. And as I always like to say, so there it is, the one thing I know you're going to remember from everything I've said tonight. So our current formula for success now depends on a heavy dose of customer insights and always studying the consumer landscape. And with that in mind, I want to make a few brief points about what consumers are thinking today and how to better connect with them as we all work to keep our businesses growing. My first point is one we're all pretty familiar with. The U.S. consumer is spending less. It's been a trend since the recession began in late December of '07, they say, and it's now pretty much a way of life for everyone. Americans who had a negative saving rate up until that point are now saving at a rate of nearly 6%, which means that a lot of disposable income has been taken out of the spending stream, and they're spending differently. There was a recent report out that showed Americans are now spending more on electronics than durable goods. The notion here is that the recession is causing people to hold off on buying major household items. We all understand why that is, but it's not keeping them from buying the iPad or the flat-screen TV or their personal assistants and all the other electronic gadgets that are so popular today. And this leads me to my second point. Today, more than ever, consumers are looking for products that excite them. They want things that give them a sense of sustained enjoyment and truly enhance the way they live. What that means for all of us is that we have to focus on meeting these kinds of needs. We have to keep innovating and finding new ways to deliver this more powerful connection with our customers, whether it's through new products or a new convenience, or any small twist on the way you do business that helps make your business more essential and your product more essential to the customers. It's what companies from Apple to Amazon to Netflix and Coca-Cola are doing on a regular basis, and we like to think McDonald's. It's a big part of why we are successful. The downturn we're in can't be an excuse to sit still and completely retrench. Today, more than ever, you need to think a little more boldly and outside the box and keep looking for new ways to make that deeper connection with consumers. The next point I want to stress is that when it comes to consumer demand, the future is very much about the emerging world. This year, the emerging economies will account for more than one-third all global consumer spending, and that number is expected to keep going. It represents 2 billion people, this emerging middle class, $7 trillion this year, one-third of the spending, and it's going to 20 billion over the next 10 years. It's all happening from a rising standard of living of the growing middle class in waves of new technology. And as we all know, the two main markets to watch are China and India, where incredibly 40% of the population now lives. Think about this. In China, the middle class is now roughly the same size as the entire U.S. population, and it keeps growing. They have another billion people that are trying to get into that economic class or the middle class. And every week, there seems to be a new reminder of China's increasing economic power. General Motors, for example, recently announced that for the first time ever, they are building more cars in China and selling more cars in China than the U.S. And we all saw the news last month. China has now become the second largest economy behind the United States. The markets in the emerging world are growing stronger and more attractive for businesses, especially today, when you have to be able to operate in various economies and seize every opportunity that arises. You have to, or you're not going to be a player in the future growth. Now, all that said, my next point is this. Moving into new markets and forging a stronger global presence takes plenty of work and persistence. McDonald's has been in China for 20 years, and we're continuing to strengthen our connection with the Chinese consumer. But when we first arrived, we realized we had a lot to learn. I happened to be in town when we introduced our first drive-through in China. We watched as the Chinese customer would drive around, get their meal, park their car, and then walk into the restaurant and eat it. We had a lot to learn. It wasn't a surprise. You see how people live, small spaces. They wanted to go to a two-story air-conditioned building to eat their food. Now, the drive-through experience today is much advanced, much more experienced. We see less of it, but it still happens. But I think the key to building a stronger global presence is to first understand what customers want on a universal level. Things like quality, safety, and value, and then figure out how to deliver those things in the most local and relevant way. And that takes me to my final point. You have to do what it takes to fit in. The key to achieving success on a global level is becoming part of the culture wherever you are. And each business needs to figure out how to do this in its own way. The path we've taken at McDonald's looks like this. We recruit local executives so that the men and women running our business truly know the market. We partner with local franchisees and suppliers so that people in our restaurants and supplying our products are familiar faces. And we embrace the local customs and consumer needs. One example of this is France, where we recently celebrated our 30th anniversary. I was there for the 30th anniversary, proud of our accomplishments in France. But now, all of you know, France and the French are quite particular about their food. I believe they call it cuisine. They're not inclined to embrace the idea of a quick-service restaurant. So as you might imagine, they didn't exactly welcome us with open arms 30 years ago. Today, however, France is home to nearly 1,200 McDonald's. It's one of our most profitable markets worldwide, and we succeed there by following the same steps that we take everywhere. Listening to local customers, delivering what they want. For the French, it's all about a high-quality meal and a comfortable modern dining experience, like most other places. They prefer premium sandwiches. They like to come in, sit down, take their time when they're eating. And so our menu in France has a number of premium offerings, and our restaurants there are some of the most comfortable, spacious, and relaxing. We're proud of what we've achieved in France and what it says about our ability to be a global brand and a local favorite. In truth, we are a French brand in France. And what I always like to say is, if the French love us, who could hate us? So, Michael, I'll wrap up my comments there and just say that these continue to be challenging times for nearly everyone, but what I hope I conveyed was a sense of optimism amid these challenges. The environment is there for business to step up and deliver in new ways to excite their customers, and to step out and expand their reach into the increasingly dynamic markets around the world. The opportunities are in front of us, and yet I'm reminded of something the great inventor Thomas Edison once said: opportunity is often missed because it comes dressed in overalls and looks like work. What I highlighted was some of the work I believe it takes to seize these opportunities and stay connected with consumers moving forward. It's about thinking more boldly and delivering innovations your customers will love, meeting the highest level needs that people have in the most up-close and personal ways, and doing what it takes to be a brand that is always local and part of every culture it serves. Excelling in these areas is no doubt an ongoing journey, but it's the road of continuous consumer relevance, and that's a place we all need to be. And thank you so much. I look forward to our discussion.
Jim, I do have some notes in case I forget the point or two that I want to make. First, my credentials, because I don't know many of you, and of course I'm at Northwestern University. In fact, two people behind me just said they were my students, and maybe some. Any other students of mine here by chance? How many hands? Very good. Obviously, I passed them because they're willing to admit it. My credentials are these. I'm an economist, basically, who turned to marketing, and marketing is a form of economics anyways. I was trained at the University of Chicago under Milton Friedman and became a free market economist. You can't avoid becoming a free market economist studying under Milton Friedman. However, I went to MIT afterwards for a PhD and studied under two Nobel Prize winners, and that they were Paul Samuelson and Bob Solow, and they are Keynesian economists. And as a result, I decided to go into marketing. Those people, those three Nobel Prize winners, couldn't agree. And in fact, it was always a fabulous debate when Paul Samuelson and Milton Friedman would talk to each other. They did talk to each other. And so I went into marketing because I had one problem with economics. They never talked about anything other than price, They didn't admit to the existence of wholesalers, retailers, and the whole distribution structure of the economy. So I wanted to know more about that. But as an economist, let me make some comments. We are in a situation of insufficient demand. That's what we're dealing with. How do you increase demand in a sensible way? There's a lot of ways to increase demand that would only put us back in the situation we're in now. That is, I'm beginning to see signs of a zero-cost financing for a car. Come in now and you don't have to pay for 2 years. And there are signs that the way we're maybe trying to get people to buy again is to get credit out there. And you know, it was the problem of easy credit that caused the problem. So how do you make sure that the people who can pay back get loans? How do we make money available to people who can't afford to buy certain things? Otherwise, we're going to have the same problem again. Now, what are people doing in this situation? What are our consumers doing? It was mentioned that they're spending less. They're spending more carefully. For example, the high-ticket items, and that would be automobiles and major appliances, furniture, and so on. They have problems selling enough of what they can make. Many people are moving toward store brands and minor brands. They go into Walgreens and they notice a price difference between the nationally known brand and the Walgreens brand of about 20 to 30%. And many commentators are now saying to all of us, buy the lower price brand and see if you like it. And if you like it, you don't have to pay for the national brand name, because that reflects a move toward what we call commoditization. Brands exist in point to deny commoditization. That is to say, there's something special about what we're offering, and even if it costs a little more, it's worthwhile. But in a tough economy, people are exploring these other brands. There's other things happening. There's a group of consumers we call LOHAS consumers. LOHAS is L-O-H-A-S, and it stands for Lifestyles of Health and Sustainability. It's not a subculture. It's about 19% of us. And that's about 41 million people who are into buying organic foods, energy-efficient appliances, solar panels, alternative medicines, yoga tapes, and some other things which really constitute new markets, growing markets. And there's even some sign in these times of a retreat from materialism in a Young and Rubicam study, and Young and Rubicam represents one of our best advertising agencies. 62% of Americans agree with the following statement. Since the recession, this is the statement, I realize I am happier with a simpler, more down-to-basics lifestyle. 77% of the people in the survey said, how I spend my time is more important than how much money I make. So there may be a retreat from what some people have called mindless consumption and overconsumption toward becoming more mindful. Now, that may all change when prosperity appears again and we may be flush with money and anxious to buy a lot of things. In contrast to what's happening in the United States, China and India are really booming. Asia is booming, and Jim mentioned that as well. I think China had an 11% growth rate last year. It's about 9%. India about 7%. And China has been able to reduce poverty on a scale never before seen in any other part of the world. I read a recent book, which is a study of Chinese consumer behavior. Quote, China has become the world's largest consumer of everything, from automobiles to beer, single occupancy homes, which is a concept they didn't have for a long time, shopping in gigantic malls, those malls are huge in China, eating meat-based diets served in fast food outlets. Even rural Chinese have been buying refrigerators, TVs, mobile phones, and larger homes. India is an interesting case, too. And some people see India, that the poor in India, and so much of the country is still poor, that they represent a market opportunity if you want to think about it. So there's a big drive in India to bring down costs even further. They now package a lot of the consumer goods, shampoos and other things, in what we call cachets, so that it's like many years ago when I was in India, you could buy one cigarette at a time because most people couldn't afford a package of 20 cigarettes. So sachets have come along. Cataract surgeries are done for what might be about $50. Artificial limbs, which cost $5,000 to $20,000 here, if you've been unfortunate enough to need one, is about $100 there. They have a $100 computer. I think it is one that you have to crank to get it to work, but, and Tata is developing a $2,500 car. So, in fact, some people are saying, let's study what India is doing to reduce all these costs and then bring some of these products and innovations back to the West. Now, I see some dilemmas in this whole effort to recharge our economy. First, we have to deal with how do you move out of recession into economic growth. I recently talked to the former CEO of Y&R, Peter Georgescu, and Peter wrote a book recently about his own life, and in it he makes a big point about the world is saddled with excess supply. I started with this notion of insufficient demand, but let's also look at the issue of excess supply. Name any industry that doesn't have overcapacity. What excess supply means is that there are more suppliers than there is demand. And of course that leads to intense competition, lower prices, outsourcing, and a whole bunch of other things. So jobs are going to be the problem. I remember a book that came out some years ago called The End of Work. And it wasn't a science fiction book either. So the question is, how do you create jobs? Marketing is one answer. Marketing is the art of separating you from your money to some extent, because there's something you want, and we're glad to supply it. Another job-creating force is technology. Every time we have iPads and iPhones and brand new things, we're going to get a wave, a Schumpeterian wave of demand, and that's good. Government stimulus money, especially if applied to infrastructure needs like better roads and bridges and so on, could be very sound investment. So at this point, we're into a lot of uncertainty because the crystal ball that I'd like to have, I can't really read it because it depends so much on what government policies are chosen. Among the choices are, do we do more with stimulus or with tax cuts? Even with tax cuts, it depends on who gets the tax cuts, whether they will spend the tax money or save it. We do know that if poor people get a tax cut, they're likely to need to spend it because they have needs and they have bills to pay and other things. And so we call that a marginal propensity to consume of 1. That is, all of it is often spent. There's another problem. What industries do we have, and what industry should we develop to create jobs? We have a lot of business with military goods and high technology. We have manufacturing involved in those areas. What can we do to get into more cleaner energy manufacture, windmills, water management? We have a terrible problem of water shortages in California and other places. Robotics is a very promising area. Nanotechnology, Northwestern, where I teach, has a very good group working on nanotechnology. Artificial intelligence, bioengineering. Bioengineering is an extremely promising area, and anything we can do with creating energy from non-carbon sources. Andy Grove of Intel has been very verbal about manufacturing disappearing from our economy and how sad that will be if we keep outsourcing what we should be producing here, because, he says, the next thing to fall when manufacturing gets smaller is innovation. Innovation goes next. Now, the second big dilemma is this. If we did achieve economic growth again, can we handle it without creating too much pollution and climate problems? Let me read a statement from the CEO of Unilever, and this is quoted from the Financial Times. He said this: our ambitions, this is Unilever, which is their Procter & Gamble in a sense, our ambitions are to double our business. Well, it's wonderful to have companies that are ambitious like that. They want to double their business. But to do that without reducing our environmental impact and footprint, that's wonderful. If you can do both, double the business and have no net impact on the environment, but the road to, he says, but the road to well-being doesn't go via reduced consumption. So it's not about reducing consumption. It has to be done via more responsible consumption. So he's very much wanting to reconcile growth with sustainability. However, if every company sets its goal to double its business, will it be possible to achieve sustainability and protect the planet? So we're going to, now some companies here are managing to do that. Walmart is actually a major force in getting their suppliers to get more fuel-efficient trucks, and they're finding so many ways to actually profit from saving energy. DuPont has done a great job, too, of reconciling profitability with sustainability. One more dilemma, and that is the poor, which are growing in number. What can we do? These are people who, if they had money, they would overwhelm the demand that we need. We couldn't even handle the demand. It's not like we're a no-need society anymore. I have a friend in Italy who wrote a book called The No-Need Society when things were plush, and he thought, you know, there aren't going to be many more things to do in terms of material needs. No, the truth is, how do we help the poor? The irony is, if we succeed, it's going to increase pollution, congestion, and all the bads of a developing society. It's nothing we have to worry about right now, and I'm sorry to even call it a worry. It's more like what we want to do is lift the poor out of poverty, but there are those issues about how do you balance your economies. Now, I was very shocked by a study reported in Newsweek magazine. Have you read that study? It came out a few weeks ago, on the best countries in the world. We are number 11. What was their criteria? We are so good at GDP. What is their criteria? Well, they decided to say 4 things or 5 things count. One of them is the degree to which we have an economic dynamism. Another is the degree to which we have, I guess I don't have all 5 here, but in any case, they put ahead of us people like, well, Sweden, Switzerland, Canada, Australia, and so on. It's sort of a wish to define something other than the gross national product as a measure of the quality of life in a country. Actually, our GDP per capita makes us number 9 in the world. Our GDP absolutely makes us number 1. Our GDP per person makes us number 9. So the question really is this, do we need other measures? And you may know that there's a lot of work being done now on what is called metrics for happiness measurement within cities, states, and countries. It started, by the way, with the king of Bhutan, who said we ought to be measuring gross national happiness. Recently, Joseph Stiglitz, the economist, and the economist Amartya Sen wrote at the request of Nicolas Sarkozy. They did a study, and it's going to be published shortly, on happiness measures that economies can use. Also, one more consideration, I think we'll be moving from the age of marketing to the age of demarketing. You have to understand that there are an increasing number of things we would maybe want to demarket. That is the waste of water, the waste of energy, and other behaviors that are not healthy behaviors for people. And you'll see probably more happening with the concept of demarketing. Now, I want to end by just quoting from a book that all of you, or many of you, have read by John Kenneth Galbraith so many years ago, called The Affluent Society, because it is going to remind us of values that are important. Quote, "The family which takes its mauve, air-conditioned, power-steered, and power-braked automobile out for a tour passes through cities that are badly paved, made hideous by litter, blighted buildings, billboards, and posts for wires that should long ago have been put underground. They pass on into a countryside that has been rendered largely invisible by commercial art. They picnic on exquisitely packaged food from a portable icebox with near a polluted stream, and go on to spend the night at a park, which is a menace to public health and morals." All this says that we need to think more deeply about what really makes the good life. So I hope you don't mind me being a little more philosophical about what demand is all about and what life is all about, but I wanted to share that with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Jim, for those very helpful opening comments. So let me, now that you've sort of set the landscape here, let me focus in on a few things that you said. Jim, you talked about the fact that consumers were spending less, saving more. You mentioned the 6% savings rate. And so if you look historically in the United States, the savings rate had been 7-8% on a long-term trend, and then of course during the bubble it went down to 1%, even negative in certain periods, and now it's up to 6%. And of course this is a key determinant of consumer spending, and consumers' increase in savings rate, they're very logical. They, their net worth is down, their housing prices, value of their homes are down, their portfolios are down, the stock market, so they're saving more. How do you see this emerging in the future? Is this going to be a trend that where we stay at these high savings rates, even go higher than 6%? Or do you see as growth returns in the United States and incomes start to go up, do you see the savings rate going back down again?
I probably agree with the latter, only because I think the recession that we're in and the high unemployment rate has created this reduction in spending and even maybe this sort of wholesome outlook of life that I can do with less. Yeah. Because I think the American consumer and the American public are stuck on spending. I don't think they're savers. I don't think that it's going to go back or increase or stay at 6 or go to 7 or 8. Now, I don't know that for sure. If I did, I could have been on the Federal Reserve Board with you and probably been able to add some value. And I'm not an economist, but I'm a student of consumer behavior and the American way. And I just think that the entire concept around consumer spending and particularly saving and the gratuitous nature of the way people live today, the me generation, wanting it now. And yes, I think there's been some receding of that, but I think it's because people have been put in that place. They're happy with less now because they have less.
They have less.
They're forced into it, right? I'm downsizing. Well, you're downsizing. Why is that? Well, it's too much house for us. And I mean, you hear your friends tell you that all the time, and we know, truthfully, that that's the case in much of their situations. But in many times, it's because they got to downsize. People have to cut back because they don't have the access to the credit or the other kind, the easy credit that you talked about.
Mm-hmm. Phil, what do you think? If you had to sort of forecast in the future, where do you see the savings rate going?
When I look at consumers, and I'll answer your question that way, I always remember that we have to segment the market very much. There's so many groups and subgroups going different. There's one group called the less is more group. They really want to go down and live simpler lives. There's always the group that wants to accumulate material wealth, not keep up with the Joneses, exceed the Joneses. So we have a lot of legacy behavior that's going on. Now, as far as the savings rate, it could always go higher. Japan is a good example of what a high savings rate would really be. And of course, the situation they're in too. They're stagnating. I think that we'll probably return pretty much to normal if we click onto economic growth again. But really the wise thing now is probably saving rather than spending, even though it doesn't help the job situation. The source of jobs will end up being government expenditures on infrastructure to some extent and maybe stimulus.
When you say return to normal, you mean return to a lower savings rate than where we are now?
No. I think savings will continue to be in for the next half year or year at the rate it is, 6%.
Yeah, but longer term, and we're looking out 5 years now.
But no matter what that is, I heard an interesting statistic just yesterday or the day before that people between the ages of 34 and 66 years old are short for the monies that they're going to need for retirement by some astronomical number. So no matter what happens to the savings rate, they're going to be short. And so when you see this happening, it's incredible.
Yeah. So longer term?
Yeah, it's going to go up. I mean, look what's going to happen to pensions and so on. Especially if some pensions are disappointing and being cut. People are going to have to save more.
So what you're describing is an economy over the next 5 years where our economic growth and our standard of, let's say, our standard of living is not going to grow as rapidly as it has before the financial crisis.
That's my outlook.
Yeah, so it's a different environment going forward for all of us. Now,
by the way, short of a Schumpeterian breakthrough, which we mean another big wave of innovation, where we all, it's happening with the electronics and the cell phones. I mean, without them, we'd be worse off. But maybe some other very big new lifestyle materialistic elements will come into being for investment purposes, and then we'll have a mountain of demand again.
Yeah. Well, demand, of course, put my economist hat on, the aggregate demand is determined by consumers. They're 70% of the economy, business firms, international, the net of exports and imports, and of course government is the other piece. So in the aggregate, as that aggregate demand increases, that's going to employ more, then we'll be employing more people and our standard of living goes up. But, we've got a ways to go, and this is a very slow and sluggish recovery. But you mentioned technology. Why don't you talk a little bit about, and I know it's very hard to predict technological trends. I mean, the internet, which we all live by these days, it's only been about 10, 12 years since there have been a lot of websites on the internet that we use. But we can't go through a day without going on the internet today. But if you were to look ahead over let's just say 5 years, any sense of what types of technological changes we could expect to see that would affect our spending, our behavior, our consumer behavior?
Well, there's going to be a lot done in the automobile industry, I hope by us, but it may come from the cars being made in China and India. Where we're going to have a lot of investment in smaller cars and more fuel-efficient cars, which we badly need in a sense. So that's one technological front. What I notice is that all of us are asking our companies to be more innovative, to invest in innovation. I mean, we've got some star companies doing that. Of course, Apple and Samsung and a whole bunch of other companies are very active in always improving whatever they make. And then at Northwestern and other business schools, we are giving courses in entrepreneurship. In fact, the young people who used to flock to the big companies, and now the big companies aren't hiring, they see the answer as innovating something and running their own business, creating a business. In what areas? Some of it is in bioengineering, some in robotics. There's a lot of waves of innovation that are possible.
I agree with that. I think where the next wave of innovation certainly needs to come from is on this whole issue on sustainability, bioengineering, the social responsibility side, energy efficiency. Now, that's not about consumer spending, because I am of the belief that the Apples of the world and the others, how many apps do we need, right? We have applications today with personal assistants, the iPads, all the other communications devices that I believe are a distraction relative to people being able to do meaningful work and add value to their organizations. But what I do believe, the technology is going to show itself, whether it's wind energy, those other kinds of things that are going to be the better good for the entire country, right? I hope it's America. I hope it comes here. But I think that activity in the bioengineering, and you're talking about the companies, and McDonald's is biodiesel, and we're all trying to reduce our carbon footprint. And I think there are emerging technologies around all of those things that are going to help us do a better job with that. But on the side of the technology around applications for the internet and all of these other things, yes, there'll be more, but it will become a commodity now, as you talked about earlier. And so those brands will continue to be successful, but those sales of those technologies and applications are going to be a commodity. They're not going to be that expensive. okay, they'll sell a lot of them. Look at the number of iPads they've sold. But I think the big move and the big benefit for our country is going to come from the things that you had mentioned.
Yeah.
Well, we've always been a nation of entrepreneurs. We've always, because we have open markets, because it's easier in this country for someone to start up a business, we've always done well here. We've,
Right.
We can't always predict the industry, but we've always been able to, people want to make a profit, they figure out how to put the resources together, and we seem to be able to do it more quickly than in other countries.
And if we get our government regulations and our taxation and the economic growth model through the administration that's going to send us down the right path, as you mentioned, we will continue to encourage entrepreneurship. But there are a number of things I think have to be done today. I'm sure the Obama administration, and I heard Larry Summers talking this morning, and all of the gurus there will figure this out. But it's a risky situation right now, and the misunderstanding of what will actually get us there, and then when they make that decision, as you said, what will the outcome be? And the unintended consequences we'll have to see. Otherwise, I think in the next 5 years we're going to be stuck with more of the same.
Let me shift to, you brought up technology. Technology, of course, influences the media, the marketing media, the advertising media, and how firms try to advertise their products. And there have been huge changes, of course, already with the use of the internet. But if you look ahead 5 years, what types of trends do you see developing here?
It's pretty clear that companies, by and large, are adding to their promotion mix the use of social media and the internet and everything else. And in fact, they're becoming so aware that there's so much conversation going on between people on the internet and with each other, that one of the things that companies have to recognize is they cannot be a bad company anymore. That's suicide. Word of mouth is so strong that anyone disappointed in an automobile that they bought could actually attack the company by broadcasting it, blogging it. So this is good in the sense that all companies will get better, because the ones that aren't good are going to decline. Now, as far as the social media, I think Procter & Gamble is probably at maybe 10% of their budget, maybe even 12% is going into social media and so on. Social media allows a company to have a conversation one-on-one, basically, with customers. In fact, companies are building huge databases of their customers and their prospects, and they would like to almost get to know who their customers are and how to communicate with them through the new media. Whether or not the customers welcome being communicated with, that's a trend. So I think that's going to increase, that the percentage of non-classic advertising, classic advertising is radio, TV, billboards, newspapers, and magazines. That percentage would decline of the total.
So you said 12% today at P&G. 5 years ago it was probably zero, I guess.
Yeah.
What about McDonald's? How do they look at
We've
this?
shifted about 20% of our traditional media to the internet and social media. And we do everything. We know everything. We communicate with all the mediums. And our head of corporate relations is here, Jack Daly, who spearheads this activity. We Twitter and we blog, and we don't have a Facebook account. But right? I'm sure we have a lot. Huh? We do. We do? The Facebook account? Who's your favorite five? No, who do you have? I don't know. But we've shifted about 20% over the years from the traditional media, television, radio, and newspaper.
We're still trying to figure out how to measure the new media.
Yeah.
We never learned how to measure the old media, by the way.
Right.
But the new media is actually going to be more measurable, because especially on Google or things like that, where someone says, I want to know more about a Chrysler automobile, and then all of a sudden there are ads, and you can see if anyone clicked onto a dealer. In some ways, it's good for the measurement of the media, of the expenditure that you're making.
So you're going to have a lot more information about your customers, obviously, through whenever they log on.
And they'll have a lot more information about the companies.
And about the companies.
And the competitors. I'm worried about sales forces, which, I just saw a number of how many people are in sales in this country. It's in the hundreds of thousands of people are in sales. And what's happening with the internet is purchasing agents are able to get the information they want before deciding who to buy something from without letting a salesman come in to see them. The pharmaceutical companies say, just leave your samples with us. The physician has no time for you.
Right.
So sales jobs are at risk, just like when we started to have auto insurance being sold without salesmen by some of the companies. It raised the whole question, are we disintermediating sales forces? In certain industries, we are intermediating the need for salesmen.
Right.
And what's that going to do to job? What about people returning from the war? Soldiers and jobs. Are we keeping the war going in order to not face what to do with our soldiers who come back looking for jobs? Now, that's not the reason for the war going on. But I think and when the debt is mentioned, the debt that the U.S. has, that keeps increasing, partly because of trying to be the policeman of the world, we have a very big question about how long do we stay in Afghanistan?
Yeah, well, the debt issue is subject entirely different, obviously. We're definitely, as a nation, living beyond our means. And
that's what I meant.
Our fiscal trends, our government spending is unsustainable. I mean, we know that because of mostly Social Security entitlement programs, most Social Security and particularly Medicare. But that's a big subject and probably too big for this panel tonight. But let me ask one other question. Phil, you started out saying that economists only talked about prices, and that's why you went into marketing. Well, these days, of course, there's a lot of talk about deflation.
Yes.
And we always assumed prices would go up. Fed sort of has a target for inflation of somewhere around 1.5%, 2%. But there's a lot of discussion about the possibility of unwelcome disinflation, inflation going up lower than that target, or even deflation, as you've had in Japan for quite a period of time here. What does consumer demand look like in a deflationary period if we did get into a situation like that?
Yeah. Before I answer that, it is true that we hear double talk. We hear people saying, oh, we're going to have such inflation because we're in such debt, and there's something to that. And on the other hand, what we're really experiencing is deflation. We're finding prices going down in many places, partly because we're importing cheaper made goods from abroad. And
the excess capacity.
And people are spending less. So the thing is, your question is, what is an economy like which is experiencing deflation? And I guess Japan is the answer because they're not going anywhere. It's like, I don't know how it correlates with economic growth. Can you be having economic growth and deflation?
Well, typically what you expect is consumers would hold off spending because they expect prices to go down.
Sure.
So they hold back.
Which causes the prices to go down.
Yeah.
It's and
you have excess capacity and lower demand, so so it can be a cycle, a downward cycle.
The excess supply, remember I said there's excess supply is a problem. That cleans itself up over time because what happens is some companies fail. If there are too many competitors and too many companies, some of those companies are bought, some liquidate, and a rationalization takes place. I have a good friend who said that in the future, most industries will consist of just 3 companies. An exaggeration. And he was thinking of the auto industry and this industry and that industry. He said because three big companies at the most. You see, many industries have 7 or 8 big companies, or like if pharmaceuticals, many big competitors. But he was driving at the point of what he calls industries rationalize over time, and that clears up some of the excess supply.
Right. Jim, you're in some countries where there is deflation now. What's it
We
like?
have 4,000 restaurants in Japan.
Yeah.
And what happens is, of course, you have no pricing elasticity. You're not able to pass in any of your cost of goods and that sort of thing. And yet, you know, there's easy access to money for the people, but they're not spending it because, you know, the cost of goods and
They're so small in their housing, by the way.
Yeah.
They don't buy a lot because
Right.
there's no room to.
And they were traditionally, you know, big-time savers to begin with, and it hasn't changed their culture that much, depending on where they are in the deflation or inflation. Yeah. It's just the way they live their lives, and they're very conservative people. But for our business, we've continued to perform well there. But you know, the pricing relationship's been flat for all those years. Just
Flat but not declining. Your
Been
retail
flat.
prices have been flat.
Been flat.
Which is holding them above the average price.
Yeah. And you know, they went through an enormous banking fiasco, which is really what started the whole deflation to begin with, because they just transferred their debt from one bank to the other, and they had that whole issue, and you know, their regulation solved that problem, but it created a real problem with the deflation that they're seeing there now. And it doesn't look like they're coming out of it anytime soon.
No. Which I guess maybe it's related to some of the political instability they've had too in the last 5 years. Well, this is the time we can open this up for questions from the audience. So we have some people with microphones, I believe, and so please raise your hand. We'll get you a microphone. Please identify yourself and then stand up. And here's a question right here, and there's one in the back.
So my question is a little bit more.
Let's wait for the mic, please. And please identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Randy Kurtz. And this is a little bit more of economics than consumer marketing. But in North America, if we have consumers saving at such a high rate, and consumers really drive the economy more so than in industrial production, is government spending the only way to get out of that trap? Because the last stimulus plan didn't work so well.
Yeah, you know, I'm a Keynesian, and there's a lot of talk that Keynes is dead now, and it was a mistake, and that there's even a thesis that we didn't get out of the Depression, the Great Depression, as a result of all that money Roosevelt spent on things, and that's the thesis of the people who are monetarists, who say basically we would have gotten out of the Depression faster if we didn't have stimulus. I'm a Keynesian. I still believe there's a positive role for government. Government is very small in our country. You take some great, very successful countries, Sweden and all the Scandinavian countries, they've got more government, and they get along fine, and they're growing, and they're wealthy, and all that. So I don't see a specter. Government is a specter. I think we need government as a countervailing force, because look what happened when enterprise went free and sold everything to people who shouldn't have bought these things. They didn't have the means to repay the homes they were buying and so on. So we need all three. We need private, we need enterprise, we need government, we need the nonprofit world, and a nice balance between them. So my answer is that right now we need government stimulus. I happen to be believing money well spent. There, you know, you can always find some cases where at my own university at Northwestern, someone got a grant, and it's a silly project. I don't know how he ever got it from stimulus money. But the fact is that that's what you do, because we have a lot of bridges that we have to fix in a lot of other situations. So I'm not worried about that. It will pay for itself just if it helps us get out of the mess we're in. Where else is it going to come from? It's not going to come from other sources.
No, I don't really have anything to add, but I can just see that if we had long discussions, Phil and I would disagree on a lot of things. But,
Well, that's right.
But that's okay, right?
And we're friends, so.
Okay, I think there was a question right back there, right on the aisle.
Hi, my name is Gautam Dingra. I know you talked about the fact that China and India are booming, and even though they have grown a lot, relative to Western economies, they're still small. So the question comes up, is their growth going to be enough to keep the world economic engine running, even though they're growing at 7 and 9%? Or is that going to get more than offset by the decline in consumption we are seeing in the Western world? And my question has to do with the next 2 or 3 years, not next 5 or 10 years.
Real good question, because I haven't seen anyone comment on that yet in the news. As any economy matures, its growth rate will slow down. The problem is, China and India have so much pent-up demand. They've been without so much for so long. I certainly don't think they're going to increase substantially their present growth rates, which are high. I think there will be a slowdown, but there's a lot of feeding. China and India's experience is making all of Southeast Asia and Korea and other countries in that region active and energetic. In other words, those other countries around those two big countries are the suppliers, as we are trying to be too. And I hope this continues. My guess is that it's going to at least continue for 3 to 5 years at high growth rates in Asia.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think it's important, though, when you talk about emerging markets, where I talk about the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, but there are 20 other countries that are considered to be in that group. So when you look at that 2 billion people today spending $7 trillion, it's not just the big four, it's 20 other countries in addition to that. But I don't think that they will be able to sustain the growth around the world. The United States has to play a role in it, but the United States and companies in the United States are taking their businesses there. They have to get into those marketplaces because it's a global economy now. And that won't compensate for the deficiencies in the United States. The United States has to get on board. You look at the trade agreements and the activities that are going on today, we are a little bit of a reluctant player today.
Yeah.
And that has to change. We've got to open our minds to this. And of course, as we're only thinking about the prosperity of America, trying to get jobs for the 9.6% of the people that are unemployed, a normalized level, of course, is 4%. So Philip and I were talking earlier today, to get to a normalized rate, it's going to take a lot of job creation. I don't believe it's going to get done through government stimulus, and I don't think he believes that either. I think he believes that that's a start, a way to create some jobs. But until you get the manufacturing and the players delivering this, whether it's to the technology companies or not, and the other thing that is important about America, the companies in America today have to spend their time to make their profits through getting more efficient, because the population growth is not there as compared to the emerging markets, and a lot of people are taking their business there. We know that we don't like that in America. It's offshoring, and we've got all that going on, but we have to be careful not to be too picky in providing those jobs. Certainly want to provide them here, but it's going to be a tough road to hoe.
Just let me add a little footnote and give you some numbers on this in direct answer to your question. I have some numbers from the International Monetary Fund, and if you divide the world into two groups, the advanced economies, which is US, Japan, Europe, and the emerging and developing countries, which we have been talking about here. So last year, the advanced economies declined. Their real GDP declined by over 3%, and the emerging developing countries grew by 2.5%. This year, they're forecasted to grow by 6.8%, and the developed and the advanced economies forecasted to grow by 2.6, with world economic growth at about 4.5%. So our sustainable growth rate in the United States is probably around 2.5%, but the world economy can grow at 4.5%. And I think that that would enable us to, if we do grow at that rate on a worldwide basis, that does enable us to develop, create a lot more jobs and increase our standard of living.
And we're chugging along right now, what, 1.6 or something?
Well, last quarter, this year will be about 2 probably, but clearly below. I mean, this is a slow and sluggish recovery, and right now we're growing below our trend rate, which is about 2.5. Okay, so we have another question all the way in the back, in the middle, right back there. There are 2 people right next to each other, so Josh, you pick the person.
I'm Ken Novak. What will it take to bring Africa into this discussion without prompting?
Okay.
Africa is a whole mix of different countries now. Botswana does well. South Africa is pretty healthy. Rhodesia is, I mean, the other one is terribly decrepit now. The thing is that China is very active in Africa and investing a great deal. And it is making a lot of the economies beginning to work. Their investments come into the marketplace and put money into the hands of workers and consumers. So eventually, if you want a real long-term point of view, I think Africa is going to be the next place we source a lot of our, just like Asia was the place we sourced from low-cost labor. Africa will develop that way in 10 years and on. There's no question in my mind. Because costs will go up in China and India, just like they went up in Korea after Korea got started. Costs will go up.
They went up in Mexico,
Yeah.
go up in Korea.
Right.
They'll go up in China and then shift to Vietnam, Africa. Does McDonald's have a presence in Africa?
Yes, we do. Africa is really two places where there's economic power, Northern Africa and Southern Africa. Everything else in between is a little risky and, you know, mostly trying to get their act together around their own sort of economic base. But yes, we have stores in Egypt, and we have stores in Morocco, and we have stores in South Africa.
Okay. Yes, there's another question right next to that person.
My name is Una Malkinson, and I'm wondering whether there should be anything that the U.S. can do to prevent our companies from manufacturing abroad.
Anything we can do to prevent our
I don't like
companies.
that idea of really preventing them from doing it. I mean, I think, you know, when you start putting all those stops on behavior, it leads to perverse consequences. You try to discourage them. It is true, you know, a lot of countries face this problem. In Sweden, one of their biggest companies is Ericsson. And Ericsson keeps threatening Sweden they're going to move out because it's too expensive to operate in Sweden. And New York is an expensive place to manufacture anything, and companies are moving. I'd like them to be fairly free to find the needs, to meet their needs, but wherever they can meet them most efficiently. But I know there's some people proposing putting some limits. I don't know much about that.
Jim, you want to comment on this one?
Well, it's always an issue, you know, offshoring and where jobs are created, but it's all about keeping America competitive. Our government has to do things that keep us competitive. The states have to do things that keep us competitive. I mean, take a look at the state of Illinois. The issues that we have here around the highest tax rates and the state's bankrupt. Many states across the country are bankrupt, and people have to do what they have to do. They're not providing jobs, they're not providing incentives, they're increasing the tax base, and in order to remain competitive, you know, it has to, the government has to step in. This is a case where there's no question the government has to play a role, and the state governments have to play a role. They have to be business friendly. It's not for us. McDonald's, you know, we operate our own separate 32,000 factories around the world. Yes, they're supplied by multinational suppliers, and we have factories around the world. But for businesses that have manufacturing and are going to create jobs, they need to have incentives, and they have to be competitive. When you have the union issues, what it costs today to pay. You look at all of the problems of the industry today, and the pension legacies and all of the things. Why did the big three go under? Basically, they couldn't afford to pay the legacy costs. They had to get out from under. Listen to Glenn Tilton talk about United Airlines and the issues around all of those things. In order to be competitive, we've got to have help from everybody, including the unions, I would say, which is probably another subject for another time, as you pointed out earlier.
Jim, a question. Is McDonald's under some pressure sometimes when it can get its paper supplies and other supplies, either from the U.S. or for products and your retailing in the United States? Are you ever finding any pressure to make the choice, not necessarily the lowest cost choice, but you'd like to keep the supplier in the United States?
Oh, well, we're fortunate because we're local almost every place we operate. So if you go to France, for example, 99.9% of all the goods and services are resourced locally.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
In the United States, 99.9% of all of our resources are for the 14,000 McDonald's in the United States. Mm-hmm. Those goods and services are sourced here. We're proud of that, and that sort of hedges all of that issue around being local.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes, there's another question. That's a very good group of people asking questions there. Yes.
Thanks. This question is a two-part question. It's for Mr. Skinner. Given the increase in consumer demand for healthier foods that Mr. Kotler addressed and the resulting increase in supply, would it not become economically viable for McDonald's to move in a healthier direction with its product? And can we expect to see this unfold in the near future? So if you could address that. And second part, on the topic of healthy products, I was hoping you could address the issue of the use in chicken McNuggets of dimethylpolysiloxane, which is found in cosmetics and silly putty, as well as TBHQ, which is a petroleum-based product.
Do you want to spell that for us, please?
Well, let me answer the second. Let me answer the second part first about the silly putty. First of all, it's an ingredient found in a lot of food. It's a binder. It's food. It just happens to be food that's in silly putty. So when you watch your kids eat the silly putty, not to worry. Okay, that's answer to part two. Okay. You can see I have a little passion around this. I've been asked this question before. In answer to the first part, McDonald's has done more on choice on the menu and variety around healthier options. First of all, 100% pure beef, bread, meat, potatoes are pretty healthy in their own right. But when we're talking about the proliferation of the menu on choice around salads, fruit, vegetables, choices for kids, we've done more than any other brand. And so, more to come. We continue to pursue this. We know it's an issue. We were talking earlier, Phil and I, about doing good and getting credit for doing good. I don't know why. Somebody's not.
This is the backup.
About doing good and finding ways to communicate the fact that we do good. If one would just take a look at our social responsibility report that we publish every year around sustainability, around the bioengineering, around the activities that our suppliers put forth, and take a look at the variety and the choice on the menu, the proliferation of those products that are making people feel good about it fits into their balanced active lifestyle, we'd be better off. Unfortunately, in a soundbite world, it's very difficult to communicate that on an effective basis. I looked at a poll the other day. If you look at our gubernatorial election here in the state of Illinois, there's 14% of the electorate who don't even know who the sitting governor is. So how you communicate with people about that product you were talking about in the McNugget is a little complicated.
Jim, let me just ask you a follow-up on this question, because you're all over the world. So do you see consumers in different countries wanting, quote, more healthier menu products? Does it vary by country or region at all?
Well, you mean besides the spam in Hawaii?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, what happens with every country we go into, I remember once going to Germany, and they were testing pizza. Their town that is the demographic capital of their country is Bremen. So in Bremen, they were selling pizza, and they were doing a pretty good job with it. And they did a survey with the customers, and they said, "Do you like the pizza?" "Yes, we like the pizza." "Have you had the pizza frequently?" "Yes, we have." "Will you intend to buy pizza on your next visit?" "No, we won't." And I said, "Well, why would that be?" And they said, "Because we don't come to McDonald's for pizza. We come here for a Big Mac, fries, Coca-Cola, or whatever the drink might happen to be." And that's true across our menu. But what people don't realize is the extraordinary proliferation of our menu and the number of products that we have today in terms of choice. And that's the case in every country around the world. But what people want, if you go to Indonesia, for example, at one time we had someone in our organization say, "We'd love to have a downsized, lower-class McDonald's restaurant that we can put into these markets where we have C customers instead of the A and the B, and they'll feel comfortable with that because they're going to have the McDonald's experience." What do you think happened?
You tried it and it didn't
They
work.
said, "You must be kidding me. That's the way we want the McDonald's experience." And even with the food, limited menu, they want the full experience and they want the McDonald's experience. And it is a rite of passage for these communities to have their own McDonald's. And the needs and expectations of the consumer around the world as we go in with the standard, they want that American experience the first time around, and it becomes then an Indonesian experience or a French experience.
Right.
There is a force operating to influence consumer choices when it has to do with healthy food, healthy behavior, and so on. It's a field that I participated in developing, which we call social marketing, and it's done by nonprofit organizations, which is just to convince people, to eat more vegetables and fruit. And there is a part of it is about meat and whether that's because meat consumption is growing in the emerging markets, and there are some people who feel it's not as healthy as other ways they could be eating. So social marketers are trying to go after causes where behavioral changes would be beneficial.
Right. Well, just an observation on all of this. We use a lot of consumer information to determine what it is we should be when we grow up. And when you look at our menu, and I always say this to people, we can sell anything we want. The question always is, well, will you be organic? If our customers want us to be organic, and they will buy organic produced food, right? Mm-hmm. We will be selling it. The vegetables, the fruit, the other issues of this healthier eating and all of the social marketing that you're talking about. McDonald's will be on the cutting edge and the forefront of all of that change if that is where the consumer takes us. The only problem we have is They talk a good game. It's not what they buy, and it's not what they eat, okay? If it was the case, we wouldn't be wrestling with this obesity problem that we're having. And it's not because they eat at McDonald's. You have to right-size the problem. 85% of meals today are still taken at home. When you get up tomorrow morning, you're going to have 900,000 choices of where to eat. McDonald's is only one of those. Our most frequent visitor to McDonald's visits us 4 times a month. So whenever I'm talking to the White House or talking to Michelle Obama about let's move, or I'm talking to other people who want us to solve the problem, we always have to right-size it. We want to be part of the solution, but our consumers, we're in a for-profit business. The consumers have to want to participate and have to tell us what it is they want us to produce and to sell. And when they do, for example, chicken, right? We sell $6 billion worth of chicken. We sell as much chicken today in the United States as we do beef. A lot of people don't know that. We're the largest purchaser of apples in the world, right? And so when we start talking about the healthier eating and where all that's headed, wherever it's headed, McDonald's will be on board, and we are going to be the people that will bring the consumers what it is they want. Sorry, Michael, I got a little passionate.
Well, it's okay. It's an important subject. But I think this is a good time to wrap up. And I guess if I had a summary comment to make when we talk about global demand going out 5 years, it really builds on what you've just been saying. The consumer is going to be king. Always. Always. But Phil Kotler, Jim Skinner, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thanks, Jim. Good job.
Thanks, Michael.
Great job. Thank you.